Hi, I'm Simon Stockhausen. I'm a composer, sound designer and musician, and today we want to talk about granular guitars. I've been fascinated with granular synthesis for many years now, and after doing Granular Symphonies last year, which was more a compilation of many different kind of instruments and vocals, where we had a little bit of everything, this time I had the chance to really focus on one group of instruments, the guitar. We have now created a collection of 260 sounds using almost 3 gigabytes of new samples, comprising a whole universe of string instruments, not only the guitar, but a big part is the electric guitar, where a really great studio musician recorded in my studio for 2 or 3 days with all kinds of different amplifiers and guitars. I had prepared some things, writing down phrases and chords and tonal fields where he could improvise with. And that was the starting point for hours and hours of electric guitar material. We always mic'd this with two amps. We had a big Marshall amp there too. For the first time in my life, I had the encounter with such an amplifier which is so loud and is so smelling of tubes and electricity. It was a physical sensation, I have to say, and it was a great experience, causing headache for 2 days after the recording session, I remember. But of course, I also had a big focus on the more subtle sounds acoustic guitars can make. A classical guitar with nylon strings or a Western guitar with steel strings. But we also have a psaltery, which is a beautiful, traditional, quite exotic instrument. And we have some oud and some Celtic harp. But it's all the same family of instruments. The string as such, which can create so many timbres and overtones and harmonics. Yeah, it was a fascinating journey. So let's talk a bit about the procedure of creating such a big project, such a big library, where you have many different steps from the recording of the instrument itself to the processing of a given sample and the editing and the cutting and the leveling and the equalizing, and then maybe even to the transformation using other external software and hardware processors, and then importing the sample in Padshop Pro and beginning to create a preset. So there are many different steps which lead eventually to one of those 268 presets. In many cases, I then took this raw sample and sent it through other processors. It could have been a spectralizer which resynthesizes it in the spectral domain, or even another granulator to create granular textures around a guitar sample, then sending it to an outboard tube amp to saturate it, then re-importing it, sending it through some reverbs and delays. So there can be quite convoluted ways of processing a raw sample, which then leads to a soundscape which could be 2 minutes long, and then you import that soundscape into Padshop Pro and use all the granular parameters to make this a playable soundscape, which can then be used by the composer or the musician. Other ways of creating the content was, like, for instance, with the electric guitar studio musician, I had written down some chords in a tonal field. Let's say play E major. You can also use the ninth. Then you could sometimes bring in A major and use a volume pedal. Just play very subtle volume swells over a long period of time. Then he suggested, okay, let's bring in some stomp boxes like an echo and a phaser, And then we tuned the amps so it would sound very warm but very full. And then we started recording for half an hour, and I just let him go. But you also have very raw and very acoustic samples. For instance, treating an acoustic classical guitar, preparing it with screws, and then playing it with an Allen wrench on the string towards the bridge, which creates a lot of different harmonics and overtones, which is a very acoustic, raw, but very fascinating texture, which if you hear it out of the context, you think, this sounds very electronic, but it's not. So those raw samples also work very well in Padshop Pro. And we also have some very classical heavy metal sounds, like scales I wrote down, where you would think of Stephen Vai or other great guitar players, which play very virtuosic. You will find very electronic, very ethereal soundscapes, but you will find very down-to-earth, very edgy and grungy electric guitar sounds too. Steinberg, they have created with Padshop Pro and also now with Halion 5, for my taste, the most capable granular engine out there. It sounds fluid, it doesn't sound grainy, it doesn't sound blurry like many other granulators. You can load in, talking about Halion 5, you can even load multi-sampled instruments with multiple velocity layers and granulate each key zone with own parameters. And the same engine we have in Padshop Pro. And then with all the parameter modulations which we can assign in Padshop, you can totally morph many presets by just turning the wheel a bit or a lot. And turning up the wheel suddenly unfolds this beautiful, warm flageolet texture. And you say, wow, I'm just turning this wheel. And if you watch in Padshop Pro, like 20, 25 parameters are changed at the same time by just moving the wheel. The same with aftertouch, which I often assign to the position of the grain. So you let the guitar player play a phrase with the E-bow on the guitar, which can be a minute long, which has like some intervals, some vibrato, a very expressive phrase. And you press one note and you will just hear one sustained note. And then slowly pressing the aftertouch, you're scanning through the whole phrase and sort of playing solistically with that sound. And you go, releasing the aftertouch, then it goes back and forth. And it all sounds very organic. It doesn't sound technical at all. And so that's why I love granular synthesis, because you're totally free where you play, at what speed you play a sound. It's all at your hands, and with the engine we have in Padshop Pro, it all sounds musical.